Hey everyone, welcome back again. This is Neil with Real Terrain Hobbies, and this is part 3 of our wizard tower build. And this is the water effects, the one I think most of you have been eagerly anticipating and waiting for. So here it is, it's finally here. Now if you haven't seen the other videos leading up to this one, there are two. There is one where I built the rock formation out of plaster and did all that, and then the second video is on painting the rocks and everything else. So if you haven't seen those yet, go and check those out first. So without any delay, let's jump right on in. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is build our dock, and what I am doing here is marking up the pieces of dowel with some pliers, and this gives the wood kind of grainy textured effect. I actually got this idea, I think it was from the Tabletop Crafters Guild on Facebook. Somebody in there, sorry I don't remember your name, but somebody there had posted this technique and I thought it was a good one to try out, and it turned out pretty good. So once you did that to all your pieces, go and stain. I'm putting a stain on these. These are a light brown. You don't have to use stain. I just happen to have this stuff kicking around from the tavern build, which is coming right up after this one is complete. So for those waiting on that, it is coming soon. So now to lash all these pieces together for this structure, I'm using some twine that I got from the craft store. And this is a 3-strand twine. So what I'm doing is just separating the strands and using a single strand to tie these pieces together. And right off the top, I just want to mention that all the music in this video is from a channel called Windswept. And I know I butchered that accent, but it's Windswept. It's V-I-N-D-S-V-E-P-T. It's, I think, a Norwegian accent. They make their V or W's into V's. But anyway, this guy, he didn't give me his name, but he offered all his music to me. He gave me a free download link, so I've got 140 something tracks that I can use. So that is huge for me. Music is it's so hard for me to find the right songs on my current source. And so this is great. So if you like the music in this video, go check his channel out. That is Windswept, V-I-N-D-S-V-E-P-T. So thank you, Windswept, and yeah, so everyone enjoy. So what I'm using here is a quick drying 2-part epoxy that sets in 5 minutes. So this is very quick, and I'm going to be using this to glue down the structure for the dock. And I'm going to add some sand onto this in there just to kind of blend it in, and then add some paint on top of that. So let me know in the comments below whether you guys like the music, and if you like this one in particular. It's got some vocals in it. I thought I'd give it a try. Most of his stuff is instrumental though, so be sure to go check him out. But let me know down below what you guys think. Alright, now that the structure for the dock is in place, it's time to prep this board for resin. And so I pre-cut these panels. They're about 2 inches high, and I did this on my table saw. 2 of the sides need to be exactly perfect in length, and the other 2, it doesn't matter as long as 2 are the right length, and then it can properly fit around the edge and border it properly. And I'm using red tuck tape. I just happen to have some of this stuff. You can just use regular packing tape, and this will prevent the resin from sticking to the board. So right off the bat, I noticed some warping of the base of the build, and you don't want this, especially after you poured the resin. You're not going to get rid of it, and it's never going to sit flat properly. So what I did for this, again, is I cut 3 slats of wood, all equal in height, and I am nailing this down to these slats to make it perfectly straight all around. After that's been nailed down, it's time to fasten the border together for our resin. And I'm pre-drilling these and then screwing them each together with a drill. So it kind of works best if you have a drill. If you don't have a drill, I use some nails and a hammer, and I'm sure that would work just fine as long as it's properly sealed up afterwards, which we'll get to in a second here. Next, make sure to seal up all the gaps and cracks along the edges and corners. And I'm using liquitex gel for this, which we'll be using later on as well for additional ripples in the water. So now here I just wanted a wet, glossy look on the portion of the rocks that are affected by the waves. For that, I'm using a spray adhesive, which dries glossy. You can use a gloss lacquer or varnish as well if you prefer. But it gives it that nice kind of wettish look, and it adds a nice effect overall. So finally, we're getting on with our first layer of water effects, and to start off, we're going with some Envirotex light resin, and this will just be the base layer of resin that we're going to be pouring here. And you can get this at your local craft shop or online if you can't find it wherever you are situated. Now, if you haven't worked with a resin before, I suggest you take the instructions out and read over them carefully. If you're using small amounts, it's very important to have the both the resin and the hardener in equal perfect amounts. So they recommend that you do kind of a complex procedure of mixing. You pour both contents into one cup, mix that around, then you get a new stirring stick, a new cup, pour into that, mix that around for a bit, and repeat the process again. I found that this is not as necessary with the larger amounts, as long as you make sure that they are equal. A little extra less here or there on either side did not seem to make that big of a difference. I didn't find it necessary to switch my stirring sticks, but again, if it's a small amount, I would highly recommend you read over those instructions and follow them very carefully. So I started out coloring the shallower end with a Liquitex blue ink, and I did this with a lighter hue of color. I also did the ink thinking it might be a little more transparent, but it's just as opaque as paint. So if you use paint, that is just fine. And now for the deeper end, I'm adding brilliant blue or just a straight blue from Vallejo paints, as well as some black. And this will get it, give that a nice deep look that we're trying to simulate for that deeper end there. So when you're pouring resin, it's important to keep it within 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch. Anything deeper than that has the potential to crack on you, and you don't want that happening. But again, just read over your instructions for the resin and it'll go over all of this, but just keep it between 1/8 of an inch to about 1/4 of an inch maximum. And for the transition between the light and the dark resin, all you do is stir that around until you get a nice smooth blend from one to the other. So we're going to have a ton of tiny little bubbles that come to the surface and ruin that nice clear water effect that you're after. All we do for that is breathe on it, and the CO2 in your breath will completely kill and pop those bubbles. So I wanted some seaweed to show through and give a little extra depth to my water, and I picked up this moss from my local craft shop, and all I'm doing for this is tearing off some pieces, putting it down where I think it would look good, and pushing that in, and I'm making sure that I'm scooping some of the resin over top of that. Otherwise, I learned this from a channel called Terranscapes when he made his amazing ocean boards. Push it down, otherwise it just tends to float up to the surface. So it has been 24 hours, the resin has cured, and we are now on to our second layer. And for this, I'm using the entirety of both bottles of resin, both the hardener and the resin itself, and using all of its content for that. And at this point, I felt I didn't put enough color into the first layer of water, and it seemed to be a little bit too clear and didn't have much depth to it, so I wanted to fix that on this pour. And this was kind of a bad idea. I made this more opaque, darker to give it some more depth. It ended up being too much color, too opaque, so be very careful when you're doing your layers. Do a little test area first to see if that area is dark enough for your liking when it's about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch thick. and go from there, whether you want to add more color to the whole batch or not. So just make sure you have each layer. It should actually go from your most opaque layer, gradually becoming more and more transparent to the top, so you see some nice detail coming through from the top. You get to see the seaweed and the rocks, and then closer to the bottom is where it is most opaque and is how you get that nice depth effect. All right, now on to the big wave, and I'm sure this is what most of you have been anticipating ever since I made the announcement of this project in an earlier video. So I think most of you are wondering, how on earth did I make that big wave? Was it some sort of sculpt? Did I make a mold? How did we get the resin to flow upward like that in such a dramatic way? Well, the answer to that is actually a lot simpler than you might think. I kind of figured this out by scouring the internet, seeing what other people have done. I did find something where someone had made a splash effect coming out of a cup after it had been as if someone had dropped something into it. So that is where this whole thing kind of came out of. So the main secret ingredient for this project is, as you can see, snow flocking. So the snow flocking is going to be the secret to all of the white water that you see from now on through this entire build, and this is really what has made the entire piece, in my personal opinion, this and the way that we work with the resin, which you will see here shortly. So what I did with the snow flocking, which by the way can be picked up at your local hobby shops, I'm using it as a dam for the wave. This is the overall shape of the wave that I'm doing here. We're going to start by having it as completely flat, and you'll see how we get its a big wave shape later on. So I'm using a fold on the plastic to dam in the resin as we pour, and also the snow flocking along the top, which will be the very top of the wave, and that is what's going to dam this resin in and give it its overall shape. So now all I'm doing here is adding a deeper blue into the base of the wave. And so the bottom of the wave there on the bottom of the screen is the deeper part of the wave that it's going to be further into the ocean, and the top, obviously the top of the wave, so it'll be much lighter than the bottom. And so what I'm doing is just adding the color in and swirling it around, blending it in from top to bottom, light to dark. And also we're going to add in some black to really give it some depth, as this is going to be coming in from the deeper part of the ocean board, and it's just going to add a lot of depth in there. So in my search for a good whitewater material, I came across this Vallejo ground texture. It's white. I thought I'd give it a try. I swirled it in and worked it into this big wave here, and I liked the effect, but afterwards, working on the board, the bigger board as a whole, I found that the snow was perfect just as it was. I didn't need anything extra. I didn't need this ground texture, and that the snow combined with the resin did a good enough job. So I worked this into the big wave. It added some nice effects, but I didn't put it into the rest of the board, and it still blended in just fine. Alright, so having left this to cure overnight for a maximum of 8 hours, it's time to get this thing off the plastic and shape it into a wave. So yeah, the cure time is very important. You don't want this fully cured, otherwise it'll be rock hard and you won't be able to form this into your wave. Alright, so this is the second kind of big technique for getting this big wave. The first was using snow, and the second now is our shorter cure times, so you can work with the resin. There's still some plasticity in there. It can stretch, and you can mold it and shape it to how you want. So I'm taking our big rock platform, and I'm just pushing it up there and stretching it around it and shaping it to look like a big giant wave. So this was all it is. This is the big secret. This is the big trick. for getting a giant 3-dimensional wave, this is what you got to do. So if this was a bit of a surprise to you, or if it's a lot simpler than you thought it was going to be, let me know down below. I'm curious to know what you guys all anticipated was the method that I was going to be doing this wave in. So now we're back to where we were with our resin. The wave has cured, obviously by now. It cures fully after 24 hours and is rock solid at that point. So now we're just placing it into the resin that we previously poured. It's still wet, feathering up the resin up the wave to blend it in nicely, adding some snow, and then we swirl that around within. Now you'll see that my resin is getting a little thicker at this point. This is the perfect time to add our snow. This way the snow just doesn't settle directly to the bottom, but it stays kind of within the volume of the resin itself and gives it a good, nice, foamy water effect within the depths, and it's not just sitting under a clear layer of resin. So 24 hours has passed, that layer of resin has fully cured, and now we're on to our next layer, the third layer. And with this layer, we're going to be making a lot of turbulent, rough, white water within the scene. I sprinkled some snow on while the resin was still very fresh and hadn't cured very much, and it just sunk straight to the bottom. So we'll wait 3 to 4 hours before adding the snow into this resin. And again, it has some cure time to it. It's a little more tacky now. You add the snow in, and it's more like taffy when you're swirling in your snow, but it just gets put right into the volume again of the resin, and it doesn't just settle directly to the bottom. So what I want to do now is to bring up the portion of water behind this wave, as if another wave is going to be rolling in directly after this one. I don't want the water to just be completely flat behind it. And you can see I put it into the wrong corner. So what we're going to do is let that sit for about 2 to 3 hours, and then prop the far end up even higher to give it a gradual curve upwards instead of a very sharp slope. Alright, so here we're moving back on to the big wave. So this is going to be all the foam and the very peak of the wave, the big splash, all that is coming out, that's shooting away from the rock. So with that, we're going to be using a ton of snow flocking in with the resin. So you want this really thick, and you actually want this to sit for a good 3 hours or so before you start working with it. As you'll see, when you start putting this stuff on, and if you haven't let it sit long enough, gravity just takes hold and it just kind of slowly melts back down. You think you got some nice detail in there with the waves splashing outwards and a whole bunch of little kind of foamy splash effects, but then it'll all just sort of melt into one big round kind of mold. So that's the big trick with this one. Let it sit for a good 3 hours or so first before you start working with it. So yeah, I stuffed some cotton in the gap between the wave and the rock just to fill that in, so I'm not using up too much resin. And then you're just applying big clumps of this stuff on and kind of smearing it into the rock so it sticks, as well as into the onto the wave as well. And yeah, so you can see when it's sped up like this, how much the gravity actually pulls this stuff back down, and you gotta keep fighting with it. So it's best just to, before you put it on, leave it for a good 3 to 4 hours, and then kind of work with it after that. It'll still have the gravity pulling on it, but you'll be able to work with it a little better afterwards. So I gave it some time to set up and cure somewhat, so now I'm just poking and prodding it and bringing back some shape back into the overall kind of wave structure. So at this point, we've already made great progress. The wave has set for 24 hours and it is rock solid. And you can tell the gravity kind of pulled the foam forward a little bit. So I'm just adding some extra of the foam mixture underneath just to kind of take away that lip to give it a look as if it's not being pulled down unnaturally. So now I'm creating the second part of the three-dimensional wave. So this is the part of the wave that is coming in. It hasn't hit the rocks and exploded outwards, but it's still rolling forward. So I'm going to have this kind of in line with the big splash. And so for that, we're just going to make another plain flat surface and then let it cure for 8 hours and then fold it into the shape of the rolling wave while we have that flexibility. And after the wave has cured fully for 24 hours, it's time to add it in. And after that, we're just mixing our resin again, coloring it, applying it on either side where the wave will be applied, and this will solidify the entire thing. And from there, we need to blend this into the other wave. So I'm using again the snow and the resin material for the kind of the foam splash, and we're having this sort of blast off and out of the side of the rock and giving it a big dramatic flare out, I guess, from there to combine it sort of into the wave we just added. And I'm filling in this hole with liquitex to make it line up with the edge of the board and just doing this in layers. And from here on, the technique for the foam in the water sort of developed into a process where I add these clumps of the snow kind of resin mixture that has cured for 3 to 4 hours. I'll add that, and then on top of that afterwards, I'll add in just the clear, wet resin and sort of mix it in. And this seemed to have the best effect when adding in the white water to blend it in naturally with the rest of the water. So the resin work for this section of the board is complete, and I'm just stippling on liquitex gel. It's a gloss gel. It goes on white and it'll clear transparent and glossy, and this will just give us a lot of turbulency on the surface of the water and ripples and waves and that sort of thing. So here I decided I didn't like this big wave in here after all, so I just took my angle grinder and I'm going to be cutting it away and no, just kidding. I certainly am not doing that. There's actually a little chunk of wave that doesn't fit the rest of the kind of the motion of the big wave. This was put in when I first made the form of the big splash, and it just didn't belong in here anymore. So I use this angle grinder to cut it out and just add in some resin over top of it and to kind of blend it in. It just did not fit the kind of the overall physics of the wave itself. Alright, so now I'm going to be working on the shallower area of the board. So there's a lot of rocks here. The waves are crashing in. There's a lot of turbulence and turmoil in the water. So it's going to be very frothy, have a lot of splashes and things of that nature. So wherever these rocks are kind of jutting up, that's where we want most of the turbulence, most of the white water. And I want things sort of swirling around with lots of currents and lots of movement in the water. So that's what we're going to be doing here. So I'm just propping up the back end here to have some of the more water being pushed forward as if this was the results of a wave just prior to this other one coming in. So there's a bit more water pushed ahead. And so yeah, the same applies as I had said before. So I put the big clumps of snow saturated resin, my waves and all that sort of with the white water in at first, and then I add in some liquid clear resin afterwards, mix it around. So again, after doing that, I've let that sit for about 3 to 4 hours. This one was a slightly bit longer. As you can see here, this stuff is as thick taffy. Like, this stuff was pretty tough to move around, but it ended up giving a really nice result. I actually, in the end, the gravity didn't kind of level things out. It was thick enough and cured enough that all the kind of the harsh edges still sort of melted back together, and I got some nice soft waviness in there. But yeah, it did give a lot more kind of 3D movement than it would otherwise if it had kind of cured completely flat. But yeah, I'd recommend doing it this way, and then all that snow and the clearness of the resin all combined together really well by doing it this way, and it gave me a really nice result that I was quite happy with. Okay, so at this point all the resin work is complete and we no longer need the border. So we're taking that apart, and those nails that were nailed in, you may have been wondering how we're going to get those out. Well, it's as simple as taking some pliers and pulling them out, and the head just pops through nice and simply, and it's as if they weren't even there. Alright, so this is where we're going to be leaving things with the water. I still have a little bit to do. I'm going to be adding some liquitex gel on and stippling that in, and I'm a little unsure if this is where I want to leave the water or do a couple more things with some resin, but you'll be seeing all that in the final video that will be of the Wizard Tower build itself, so look forward to that. But for now, don't stop here. There are plenty of videos on the channel. Go check those out right now and watch the next video. You can see previous videos of this build. There is the structure build and the painting of the rocks. And before that, there's an awesome build on a medieval tavern that is coming to a close here very soon once this project is done. So go and do that. And if you haven't subscribed, subscribe. And everyone, be sure to like the video. That really helps me out. It helps YouTube kind of spread the word and get my channel to grow. So thanks guys, I'll see you soon. Coming up is a channel update where I'm going to make some announcements and discuss some very important stuff, so be sure to watch that one and keep an eye out for it. So until then, I will see you on the next one.